Blake Butera opened his mouth. And everything changed. What came out of that dugout, loud enough for the umpires to hear, pointed enough to stop the game, disrespectful enough to cause one of the most talked about ejections of the entire season, was not a frustrated comment about a bad call. It was not a routine argument between a coach and an official. It was something far more personal. Far more deliberate. And far more damaging to the Washington Nationals organization than anyone in that dugout seemed to realize in the moment. Blake Butera, Nationals coach, made remarks about Shohei Ohtani that crossed a line so clearly, so undeniably, that the umpire standing closest to the dugout did not hesitate for a single second. The thumb went up. Butera was gone. But the words? The words stayed on that field long after Butera had disappeared into the tunnel. And the question that everyone, players, coaches, fans, and analysts across the entire baseball world, began asking immediately was simple. What did he say? And why did he say it about Ohtani? To understand what pushed Blake Butera to the point of saying what he said, you have to understand the atmosphere inside that ballpark in the innings leading up to the ejection. The Nationals had been fighting hard. That much was clear. Their players were locked in, their pitching staff was competing, and their coaching staff, Butera included, was engaged in the kind of intense, sideline communication that defines close, competitive games at this level. And then Ohtani happened. As he always does, Ohtani had quietly, methodically begun taking the game apart. Not with noise. Not with theatrics. But with the kind of calm, consistent excellence that is almost more frustrating for opposing teams than a loud, emotional performance would be. Every at-bat felt like a problem the Nationals could not solve. Every movement he made on the field carried a weight and a certainty that wore on the opposing dugout with each passing inning. The Nationals coaching staff had been preparing for Ohtani. Of course they had. Every team prepares for Ohtani. But there is a significant difference between preparing for him on paper, studying video, analyzing tendencies, building a game plan, and watching him execute against your team in real time, inning after inning, with no sign of slowing down. That gap between preparation and reality is where frustration is born. And frustration, when it builds long enough without release, eventually finds a voice. On this afternoon, that voice belonged to Blake Butera. Here is what the record shows. The remarks that led to Butera's ejection were made from the Nationals dugout during a moment of significant tension in the game. The umpire closest to the Nationals dugout, positioned at a distance that made the words clearly audible, responded almost immediately. There was no warning issued first. There was no preliminary conversation where the umpire approached the dugout and asked Butera to lower his language or change his tone. The ejection was direct and immediate, which, in the professional game, signals one thing clearly: what was said was serious enough to skip the warning stage entirely. In baseball's officiating structure, immediate ejections without prior warning are reserved for a specific category of behavior. They are not used for standard arguments about balls and strikes. They are not used for complaints about safe and out calls. They are used when the language or behavior in question is considered by the umpire to have gone beyond the boundaries of competitive disagreement, into something personal, something targeted, something that violates the standards the league expects to be maintained on the field. The fact that this ejection happened the way it did, immediately, decisively, without the typical back and forth, tells you everything you need to know about the nature of what Butera said. This was not an argument. This was not frustration about a call. This was a choice. A deliberate one. And the umpire treated it as such. When the ejection happened, the reaction across that field was immediate and revealing. Players on the Dodgers side who were within earshot of the dugout exchanged glances. Several of them, veterans who have been through hundreds of contested games and sideline arguments, visibly paused. That pause, that brief moment of stillness among experienced professional athletes, communicated something clearly: what had just happened was unusual enough to register even for people who have seen everything. On the Nationals side, the reaction was different. Several players near the dugout opening turned away quickly. Others found something to look at in the opposite direction. The body language of experienced professionals who know, in the moment, that something has gone wrong, and that the best thing they can do right now is not be associated with it. Butera himself did not go quietly. As ejected coaches and managers rarely do, he came out of the dugout for a final exchange with the umpire before making his way toward the tunnel. The conversation was brief but intense. Butera was gesturing, pointing, making his case in the way that every ejected coach believes, in that moment, that their case can still be made. The umpire did not change his position. Butera left the field. And the game, after a pause that felt much longer than it actually was, continued. But the damage to the Nationals' reputation in that moment had already been done. And in today's baseball environment, where every word spoken near a live microphone is captured, analyzed, and distributed within minutes, the idea that remarks like the ones Butera made could stay contained to that dugout was never realistic. This is the part of the story that demands honest examination. Blake Butera did not make disrespectful remarks about a Dodgers journeyman. He did not direct his frustration at a utility player or a middle reliever. He chose, and the word chose is important here, because these things are always choices, to make his remarks about Shohei Ohtani specifically. Why Ohtani? The surface-level answer is obvious. Ohtani is the most visible player in the game. When a team is struggling against the Dodgers and frustration is building in the dugout, Ohtani is the face of that frustration. He is the reason the score looks the way it does. He is the reason the game plan is falling apart. In the emotional heat of a competitive game, it is not difficult to understand how a coach's frustration becomes directed at the player who is causing the most damage. But there is a deeper layer here that cannot be ignored. Ohtani is not just any player. He is a player who came to this country from Japan, who operates in a second language every single day, who has navigated an entirely different culture, an entirely different system, and an entirely different set of expectations, and has done all of it while performing at a level that no player in the history of the game has ever matched. What he has accomplished is not just athletic achievement. It is a story of discipline, adaptability, and respect, both given and earned. When someone in a position of coaching authority makes disrespectful remarks about a player like that, in a professional setting, in front of teammates, opponents, and officials, they are not just expressing frustration about a baseball game. They are saying something about how they view that player as a person. And that is what makes what Butera did significantly more serious than a standard dugout outburst. The Washington Nationals organization found itself in an uncomfortable position in the hours and days following the ejection. On one hand, organizations typically defend their coaches publicly. The standard protocol is to express support for staff members while acknowledging that the situation is under review, a careful, measured response that avoids escalating the controversy while the facts are still being gathered. On the other hand, the nature of what Butera said, and the swiftness and clarity of the umpire's response, made the standard organizational defense a difficult position to maintain convincingly. When an ejection happens the way this one did, the implication is clear to everyone watching, and no carefully worded organizational statement changes what people saw with their own eyes. The Nationals front office was left managing a situation that their coaching staff had created. And in a sport where the relationship between organizations and the communities they represent matters deeply, the optics of a coach making disrespectful remarks about the game's most celebrated international star are never easy to navigate. Questions were directed at the Nationals in their post-game availability. The answers were careful, controlled, and noticeably short on specifics, the kind of answers that organizations give when they are still figuring out how to handle something they did not anticipate having to handle. Pull back from this specific game, this specific dugout, this specific coach, and look at what this moment represents in the broader context of where baseball stands right now. The sport has spent years working to grow its international audience. It has invested in development programs across Asia, Latin America, and beyond. It has celebrated its international stars, none more prominently than Ohtani, as evidence of how far the game has traveled from its American origins. The World Baseball Classic draws audiences that rival domestic league viewership. International players now form the backbone of multiple championship-caliber rosters. In this environment, a coach making disrespectful remarks about the sport's most prominent international player, and getting ejected for it in the middle of a nationally televised game, is not a small incident. It is a moment that lands differently in Tokyo, in Seoul, in San Juan, and in every city around the world where young players are growing up watching Ohtani and dreaming about the major leagues. The umpire who ejected Butera made the right call. Not just by the rulebook, but by the broader standard of what the sport is trying to be and who it is trying to welcome. Baseball's rules exist not only to manage competition on the field. They exist to maintain a standard of behavior that reflects what the sport values. And one of the things this sport has made clear, through its international expansion, through its celebration of players like Ohtani, is that disrespect based on who a player is, rather than what they did on the field, has no place in a professional dugout. Blake Butera will face whatever consequences the league determines are appropriate for what happened in that dugout. That process will unfold on its own timeline, through the proper channels, with all the relevant information considered. But beyond the official process, there is a question that every coach, every manager, and every person in a leadership position in professional sports should be sitting with right now. What does the behavior of a coach in a moment of pressure say about the culture of the organization they represent? Coaches are not just tacticians. They are not just people who give signs and manage bullpen decisions. They are leaders. They set the tone for how the players around them think, speak, and behave, especially in high-pressure moments when no one is at their best. When a coach responds to frustration by targeting a player with disrespectful personal remarks, that behavior does not exist in a vacuum. It filters down. It communicates something to every player watching about what is acceptable when things get hard. The ejection of Blake Butera lasted one game. The conversation it started will last considerably longer. And Shohei Ohtani, who has built everything he has through discipline, preparation, and an absolute refusal to let the noise of the outside world affect what he does between the lines, will take the field again the next day. As he always does. Quietly. Precisely. Excellently.